If you grew up in the 90s, there's pretty much no way that you didn't go into a Blockbuster. In that era, it was an essential rite of passage. Whereas now we just hang out and download video games or watch movies off whatever streaming service. Back then we would wait around the house for hours, probably watching a healthy dose of Nickelodeon, anticipating the time your parents were going to drive you to the nearest Blockbuster. That was like my every weekend. And it was an activity to do with friends too. One of my buddies would join us all the time, and help me peruse the different sections, sometimes for hours, checking out all the different movies and games they had. It was like a treasure hunt, where you never knew what you were going to find. My favorite section was always horror, though. The reason for that, I think, was the fact that it had all this stuff that you'd never seen or heard of before. You kind of knew that you weren't supposed to really look in there. Each tape that you picked up was like delving into a mysterious dark realm of endless unknown possibilities. One day while we were in there, we were checking out the descriptions on the back of the VHS boxes, and we came across one that was particularly creepy, called The After. On the cover there was this artistic rendition of a terrified kid in this shadowy industrial setting, standing in front of these three hooded ghouls behind him. They had these rotting faces that peered out through their hoods and gazed towards him, exposing quite a bit of gore. Actually, it was kind of shocking. I was surprised by how much it bothered me, though. It wasn't like we weren't in the horror section looking at creepy movie covers pretty much every week. I mean, a couple days before, we had just rented the movie Zombie, the one with the worms coming out of the guy's eye on the cover. So this stuff was really nothing new to me. There was something different about this one, though. The cover felt almost familiar to me. My friend Terry was fixated on it. I remember him wiping his giant red-rimmed glasses to get a closer look. I could tell even if I wasn't in, he was definitely going to rent the movie himself. "Yes, dude!" he exclaimed, looking over at my obvious reserved expression. Snatching the movie off the shelf, he started walking towards the front of the store with it. I grabbed his arm and shook my head, trying to get him to put it back. "Come on, this is going to be great!" he exclaimed, ignoring my objection again. Considering the movie's obvious graphic nature, he ended up getting his mom to rent the movie for him, which I still don't understand how he would do. Then we headed back to his place. As soon as we got there, I said I had homework and rode my bike home. I knew if I stayed, he was going to force me to watch that movie, and I just didn't have the courage for it at the time. I did decide to look up the movie, though, when I got back, and figure out why the cover was so impactful for me. Looking online, there really wasn't much to be found about it. I mean, granted, this was before pretty much every piece of information about every movie was available online, but usually I could at least find something. There wasn't anything anywhere. I guessed it must have been an independent film or something. Blockbuster would sometimes carry stuff like that in the horror section, so it wasn't that surprising. The only thing I could actually find out about it was there was a comment on a Blockbuster rental forum asking if anyone else had seen the film. Upon looking at the cover they had posted a little closer, I realized something. It wasn't the artwork in general that felt familiar to me. It was the kid. Running over to the shelf, I pulled my old school yearbook out from the year before and started flipping through it. As soon as I came across his face, it hit me like a ton of bricks. The 8th grader who went missing the year before, he was the same kid that was on the cover of that disturbing movie. But he wasn't an actor. I didn't know him that well, but we went to a small school. If he had been in that, I would have heard about it. At that point, I immediately called Terry, but his phone just rang until the family voicemail answered. That was kind of weird, but it was too late to drive over and check, so I did my best to distract myself by playing some Age of Empires until I was too tired to keep my eyes open. The next morning, Terry wasn't on the school bus. Him and I always rode the bus together, so that kind of freaked me out. Later that day after school, though, the gravity of the situation really set in. There were 3 cop cars outside my house when I got back. The police were inside talking to my parents about Terry, claiming he had gone missing the night before, and telling them that they were coordinating a search party to help look for him. That was the point when I pretty much started panicking and blabbing to the cops about the movie we'd seen at Blockbuster with the kid who went missing the year before on it. But after I finished my rant, All the adults kind of just stared at me in disbelief. They didn't completely write it off. One of the cops did ask me the name of the movie and said he would do some research to check into it. However, none of that research, or any of the search parties, ever amounted to anything. A couple months passed and still nobody had found him. They did interview the Blockbuster employee who was working that night and was able to pull up a record of the film, but said that Terry had checked out their only copy. I don't think they were super suspicious about that anyways, because that's all the investigating they did on the tape. I was devastated though. Terry and I had been best friends for years, so something like this happening was just so surreal. I couldn't accept the idea that it was likely I'd never see my best friend again. So I did my best trying to ignore it, and after about a year I did feel better. And I was even able to finally go back into our Blockbuster again. My parents brought me one night and told me to rent something for myself while they walked around the store looking for something too. Not surprisingly, I ended up back in the horror section. As I scanned the aisle, gazing at the different titles, thoughts of Terry began to rush back in my mind. So many of them we had seen together, and there were some great memories to go along with them. It eventually became too much for me to handle, and I started walking out of the section, until I was entranced by this vibrant VHS cover on the bottom shelf. It was called Clutch, and had a bloody hand lying in the middle of a neighborhood, clutching a broken pair of red-rimmed Coke bottle glasses, just like Terry's. I froze in fear, and then leaned over and picked it up. With tears in my eyes, I carried the movie over to my parents and showed them, mentioning how they were the same as Terry's glasses. My dad told me to calm down and that it was just a coincidence. He said it was literally just a movie with glasses on the cover. Which after he said that, I realized he might have been right. Unable to just totally accept that though, I headed over to the grungy looking teen who was working at the checkout counter and asked him about it. He told me they had gotten the movie in a few weeks prior, and it was from some local distributor. Once I told him my theory, he chuckled, not really knowing what to say to me. After he could see that I was serious, he just said that they had gotten plenty of titles from that distributor before, and a few people had already rented it, so it should be fine. Furious is really the only way I could describe my mood at that point. What were the odds that another movie showed up in the store with a direct connection to a kid who had gone missing? It was crazy that no one would listen to me. So without really any other alternatives, I rented the tape for myself. After scanning it, the guy told me to make sure I brought the movie back on time, because there'd be an extra charge if I didn't. Apparently it was their last copy, so I grabbed the tape and left the store. I knew if I was going to report it to the police, I needed more evidence, so I had to go home and watch the tape. I got back and went straight to our TV room to put it on. As I took it out of the case, I examined the front of the tape a little closer. There was this little picture that I hadn't seen before, of the street again. It was scuffed up like it had been through a lot, even though it was brand new. I put it in the VCR, and the familiar buzzing of an old VHS tape flickered on screen. For the first minute or so, it was just black and distorted. Then on the TV was a video of a suburban neighborhood, which looked familiar, but the image was so grainy it was hard to tell. When the camera came around the corner of one of the houses, though, there was no mistaking where it was. It was my street, and whoever was operating the camera was going towards a house with a red roof and a bicycle out front. My house. They pointed towards the left side of the house, where a TV flickered through the window. Terrified, I paused and ran over to it. I peeked out, but all I saw was an empty street. Then in the distance, these shadows began to slowly rise and form into 3 tall cloaked beings, the ones with the rotted faces from the first tape. They slowly began to approach the window, their mouths wide open and empty white little eyes in a dead stare. Falling backwards away from the window, I quickly turned the TV off and hid behind the couch. Through the curtains I could see them, still approaching. I decided at that point to try something. I ran over to the TV, ejecting the tape, and began stomping on it, breaking it in half. Unfortunately, this did not seem to stop them, though. the figures began to reach their hands through the wall, their arms stretching toward me. As a last-ditch effort, I grabbed the actual strip from inside the tape and started tearing it up. Just as one of them grabbed my neck, their bodies began to disappear. You've probably already guessed that I never returned that tape. However, I didn't go back into that Blockbuster for a long time, so I think they ended up just clearing my account. When I did end up going back there, though, I ended up in the horror section again, of course. And as I was looking through the tapes, I shuddered as I saw one on the bottom shelf. It was a very dusty copy of the movie Clutch sitting in the corner. The strangest thing about it was that when I opened up the tape, it was the same beat-up copy that I had rented. I don't know how that tape got back into their collection, and I'm terrified to think about what'll happen to someone who rents it next. So let's just say I'm happy that Blockbuster's closed down. I can't stand to think that that tape is still on a video store shelf somewhere, just waiting for someone to watch it.